Taylor here, and I want to welcome you to the Monday Plugged In edition of Bizapalooza Chat. I am so excited to have you guys here today because it is the most important conversation coming up. Look, folks, it is, as we speak, October. It's October 2nd today. And one of the things that's going on is that it's planning time. It's time to start doing your market planning and your sales planning. And if you have not been doing planning up until this point, I find that hard to believe. But a huge part of your plan is the sales pipeline. You want to double your sales? I kid you not, a pipeline is the way to do it. And so for that conversation, of course, I had to go to my good friend, Matt Hines, who is the king of all things sales and marketing pipeline. Matt is joining us from his home in Seattle today. Hello, Matt.
Hi, how are you?
I am doing great. So, Matt, you're a big expert and speaker, especially in content marketing world. What does a sales pipeline have to do with content marketing? Just curious.
Well, I think that, no matter what you do to try to generate a pipeline, whether you're doing sales calls or whether you're doing, email campaigns, or no matter what you're doing in sales and marketing, none of it works unless you are putting some kind of content into it. Content is the fuel that makes all of those efforts work. I think Ann Handley has said, everything the light touches is content. And so it's not just blog posts, it's not just emails. It's what your salespeople say on the phone. It's how they handle objections. It's the conversation they have at the beginning of the sales process that is not about you, but it's about them. The questions that you ask that get your prospects thinking, those are all important elements of good content. And so if you don't have a content strategy, then you will not have an effective sales pipeline, period.
So a sales conversation is a content marketing conversation.
Absolutely.
That's a tweetable, so I'm tweeting it. So having said that, I just kind of want to do a quick review while folks are warming up and jumping into the chat. I thought I would ask you a couple simple questions because you and I have actually known each other for years and years and years, and yet we had only met just a month or so ago.
Right.
Which is completely nuts, right? So on your LinkedIn profile, it says in the header, you have this nice little graphic image that says passion, focus, and results. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that, that was something that I used as a tagline for Heinz Marketing when I started it 9 years ago. And I think it just nicely in 3 words encapsulates sort of a core part of our values. We're passionate about what we do. We're passionate about generating results for our clients. And I think to do that, you have to be focused, right? I see a lot of marketers and salespeople doing what I call random acts of marketing. And you can make yourself look busy and sound busy and not be getting things done. So the ultimate judge of effectiveness is not how many hours you're at the office or how many emails you send. It's the results. It's like, what did you generate for your business? What did you generate for yourself? The metrics you look at, can you buy a beer with the outcome of those metrics? As far as I know, you can't buy a beer with a blog post. You can't buy a beer with an email. You can't buy a beer by making 100 sales calls today. You have to close deals and collect money to buy a beer. So I think marketing and content has to ultimately deliver on those results. Now, does that mean that I'm going to look at every blog post and expect that there's pipeline generated from every blog post? No. But I do think you have to be focused on the end result, which is ideally a metric that your CFO already understands and appreciates.
That's brilliant. So, in my effort to sort of get to know you get to know you in a different way, other than like how we've chatted and such, yeah. I think it's fascinating that you actually studied, we talked about the fact that you went to school in Washington and stayed, you studied journalism and political science, and from there you went to the Boeing Company, the Mariners. Talk about, and then Microsoft before you started your own thing. I'm skipping over a bunch of different very cool things.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about your, career journey, entrepreneurial journey, passion journey? How does one relate to the other?
Yeah, it's really a good question. The way I usually start with that is this has all been a giant mistake, honestly. As you mentioned, I studied journalism and political science. at the University of Washington. Go Huskies. I was a reporter for a suburban Seattle newspaper right out of school. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work for the Washington Post and write the wrongs of the world, and that was my vision in high school and in college. You know, never took a business class. Do not have an MBA. So, you know, I left the PR. I left the newspaper, went to a PR firm, ended up at Microsoft for a while, followed a general manager I was working for to a startup, and then really started doing B2B marketing and really kind of fell in love with it. It was something I understood. We worked very closely with the sales organization to sort of have one set of objectives. And then about 9 years ago, I just decided I wanted to kind of hang up my own shingle. And initially it was just me and a laptop and a bus pass. And so I know this looks like a kind of random place. This is actually my office. We've got, our office is in downtown Redmond, down the hill from Microsoft. There's about 12 of us in the office on any given day. It's just kind of random stuff in the office. If I swung the camera around over this way, you would realize it. Like I travel a lot, so I'm not in here a lot. So this is also really the supply closet. Our Christmas tree's back there. The skeleton we just took out for Halloween is out there. There's charcoal for the grill. We do barbecues on Friday afternoons sometimes. Yeah, I mean, I think, but in terms of, as I digress, I've been really lucky to get to do what I do, and feel very blessed to have the people I get to work with around it. It was not my intention from the beginning of my career. And I think that, it just, to me, it's a lesson that no matter what you want to do, if you work hard, you can get there. If you want it, you can go after it. It doesn't mean it's any level of guaranteed. But just because you studied something, that doesn't mean you can't do something else. Just because you didn't study something doesn't mean you can't do it.
Well, and one of the things I think is so fascinating is that, kind of taking the conversation back to content, we were talking, one of the things that when I work with clients or anyone else, and people want someone to create content for them, and I say, a really simple hack is go find a journalist. Mm-hmm. Journalist, or I think, and maybe I'm just biased, I don't have any kind of journalistic background, but I just feel like my favorite books and my favorite articles seem to be written by journalists who aren't necessarily an expert in a particular field, but what I do feel that they do really, really well is really get to the heart of the story, and they have a way of connecting with the folks that they're engaging with. So what do you think that you've learned from your career in journalism and PR to help you in marketing and ultimately marketing that generates enough money to buy beer?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm really, as much as I say this has all been a giant mistake, and that journalism seems like a weird place to start, I'm really fortunate that I have that background, and I spent a lot of time writing, and I think that my journalism degree really trained me how to be a better writer. But I also I posted up on the hashtag that I think I also appreciate that journalists have been trained how to tell stories that matter to their audience. I think too often in marketing, we write stories about ourselves. Someone says, I wrote this great blog post. Well, that's actually just a pitch for your product. Product marketers deliver materials to the sales organization that's about the product. Like, no one cares about the product. Like, you earn the right to talk about yourself when you show that you care about your customer and your audience. And I appreciate that journalists have been trained to understand their audience and to write stories that are compelling to their audience. So for instance, when I was my first job out of school, I was a reporter for this suburban Seattle newspaper, and we were on the Olympic Peninsula. And I was stationed in Olympia covering the state government beat for the Olympic Peninsula. And so all these interesting things would come in front of the governor and come in front of the legislature. And so I couldn't just write, just the straight story of what's going on. I had to write why does this matter to people that live on the Olympic Peninsula? And I had to understand who those people were. They tend to be more conservative. They're living in smaller, more rural areas, so they've got a different set of values and a different set of priorities. Their transportation needs are different. Their infrastructure needs are different. And so their priorities were different than priorities for people living in downtown Seattle or people living, way out in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Washington. And so I had to understand my audience and create content for them. That discipline, boy, I wish more sales and marketing folks had that. And it's not just writing good copy, it's understanding first who are your personas and who are the people you're selling to, who are the people you're speaking to, and translating what you care about or what they care about into your content.
Okay, so let me ask you, the starting question here is, when it comes to this idea, so, we're connecting with customers, and all of this ultimately leads to sales, why we do anything, right? Because if you're not generating revenue, you don't have a business,
Right.
right? So inside of this conversation around sales pipelines, what is it that you know for sure about sales pipelines?
Most people don't have a big enough pipeline. And I think,
say more about that.
Yeah. So the challenge that most companies have, and that most salespeople have, even salespeople that have been doing this for a long time, is they expect a higher conversion rate than is realistic. And let me explain that. So if you've got a qualified opportunity, let's say you've got someone that is interested in your product or service, they've got budget, they're the decision maker, they've got some sense of urgency to move forward. Like, that all sounds like someone that is ready to buy, right? And ostensibly they are. Experience has told me that of all of people that look and sound like that, only 25 to 33% are actually going to buy. So the vast majority of people that look like a done deal are not going to buy from you. And so when we look at companies that don't hit their number, when I look at salespeople that haven't hit their number, 9 times out of 10, they didn't have a big enough pipeline. They expected a higher conversion rate out of their opportunities than is ever going to be reasonable. And it's irrational at the beginning of the sales process, right? You're like, every one of these deals has said they're ready to go. Everyone has said they need the product, they need the outcome, and yet only 25 to 33% are going to buy. And so understanding what your sales needs are and building a pipeline at the beginning of your sales process or beginning of your year, you mentioned we're in October, it's planning time. If you know how much business you need to close next year, assume you need a pipeline that's 3 or 4x that size to get to it, right?
Oh my gosh. I have to write that down.
So here's the metrics we usually look at is if you say you need $100,000 in sales next year, right? Let's just use a simple number. Let's say the conservative 25%, you need to have $400,000 in your pipeline to get to 100,000 in sales. I'm not even talking about leads. I'm talking about qualified opportunities in your pipeline. And then the other thing you got to consider is, how long does it take for them to buy, right? If you talk to someone on January 1st, on average, if it takes you 30 days or 60 days or 6 months to close a deal, you need those leads and opportunities at the beginning of that process and at the end. And so all of a sudden, if you sit here and say, wow, I got a bunch of deals I need to close in Q4, here we are at the beginning of October. If your sales cycle length is 4 to 6 months, new lead generation isn't going to help you this quarter. You're going to have to close what's in your pipeline now. So, thinking ahead, doing the math that's realistic about what you need in your pipeline, and then working that math and working those deals actively. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is just straight sales pipeline management 101. But I can tell you for a fact, we all fall down on it. I mean, even though this is what I do for a living, it's really easy to fall off that wagon. It's easy to look at your pipeline and get complacent. It's easy to look and say, I got tons of deals. I know what the conversion rate usually is, but I guarantee you 70% of these are going to close. And I guarantee I'm fooling myself when I say that, right? So you don't want to be caught flat-footed at the end of Q3 when you're like, well, crap, I didn't hit my number because I didn't have a big enough pipeline, and I knew that.
Oh my God, who has not been in that meeting, Matt? That meeting that happens around October or November where the CEO stands up in front, you got all the sales and marketing people there, and they're like, we're short on sales. What are you going to do to bring those sales in this week? Yeah. And meanwhile, like you said, your selling cycle is so long. We're selling stuff that's $300,000-$400,000. And I mean, it just isn't going to happen.
Well,
right?
And here's another reason why you need to have a bigger pipeline is that it's not just about that initial level of qualification and your closing skills. I mean, there are a million things that can derail your deal. I mean, you as a salesperson don't have control of when the deal gets closed, but in most cases, your buyer doesn't have control of when the deal gets closed.
Right.
I mean, I'll just give you a couple generic examples from my very own pipeline last week, right? I mean, I'm running a business. I'm trying to close deals for Q4. And, it's important for me to have those deals closed at the beginning of Q4 so we can do that work in October and get bill for it, right? In my pipeline, I had someone that was ready to go say, oh man, our funding just fell through. Right? Like, he was ready to go and all of a sudden he didn't have money. I had another company that said, well, we didn't hit our Q3 number and therefore the belt's tightening for Q4. Right. And had another company come and say, oh, well, we actually hired a new CMO and she wants to kind of sit back and like, take and assess what's going on before we bring on new resources, right? These are all very legitimate things that happen in business all the time. They impacted whether I was doing business with them today or not, right? So, for every one of those that happens, I also had a deal for October that I had pretty much just moved into close lost because they went dark. And on Wednesday afternoon, I get a phone call like, oh no, we're still here, but we need to submit the PO paperwork tomorrow. So can you put that together for us? So out of the blue, this deal comes back. Like, that's how the sausage gets made. I mean, I think that if you're in marketing and you've never done sales, if you've never had a sales role and you just generate leads and throw them over the fence and think, oh, sales, you're going to be fine. What I just described, this is the sausage making, but you need to make, I don't want to use the analogy too much. You need to make more sausage or have more ground pork so that when some of it goes bad, you got enough left to finish your sausage. But no, it is the way it is. The math is the math, Well,
so let's talk about the whole stressing thing, right? So I've got a pipeline story. I mentioned it in the intro, and I swear to God, if it had not happened to me, I would never have believed it. If anybody had told me and not had this experience for myself, I would have said, you are lying. However, in the very beginning, I was not using a pipeline. I knew about it, but to your point, I wasn't like really using it because why? I could control it. There's not that many. I totally got it. It's all good.
Right.
We got it handled, and I don't know. I was in a meeting and we started doing this pipeline thing, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it for like a quarter.
Yeah.
Just for shits and giggles.
Yeah.
Let's just do it.
Hey, can we swear on this chat, by the way?
We can swear. We can totally swear.
I'm glad you went first. That's good.
Yeah, I went first, right? So one of the things I noticed is, Matt, I kid you not, in the first month of messing, not even in the first month, in the first few hours, like I put the pipeline together and then the one thing that everyone forgets is, what is the next action I need to take to move this person forward?
Yeah.
And oftentimes the action was something like make a phone call.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to make a phone call. I'm telling you, Matt, I doubled my revenue. Why? Because I could see everything.
Yeah.
So simply looking at it had made a huge difference in my revenue. So I would say, you want to double your sales? Just make a pipeline. You'd be amazed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think for two reasons. One, what you define, you will focus on. So if you build something concrete that you can look at, you're more likely to spend time on it. I also think if you build that pipeline and you're honest with yourself about what's real and what's not real in it, and you apply that to the math we just talked about, most people will realize they don't have enough pipeline. And it's better to realize that at the beginning of the quarter than the end of the quarter.
Right. So we're doing you all a big, big favor. So the one question I had on the chat was actually the first question is, why do people stress about sales? Are you stressing about sales? Right. Do you think that having a pipeline reduces the level of stress you have about sales? What's been your experience?
No, it just gives me clarity on where I need to go focus. So if I'm stressed about sales, if I'm sitting here at the beginning of October and I don't think I've hit my number, I can go do a bunch of random acts of sales and marketing. I can just start calling people. I can just start emailing people. I can go into LinkedIn and just start responding to people's. I mean, I can do a bunch of stuff that may not necessarily be the right stuff, right? So back to your question about, we're talking about, content. Okay, who am I targeting? Who are the companies I'm going after? What are the roles of the companies I want to talk to? What are they dealing with right now? Right, so we're having a lot of conversations with companies this time of year about planning. What's worked for you so far in 2017? What do you need to do next year? You need to think about your planning now. Even if you don't have budget until December, what you think you need to do and accomplish and focus on in 2018, you need to spend Q4 preparing for, getting the infrastructure in place, getting the strategies in place so you can hit the ground running on January 2nd. So that's the conversation I want to have with the companies I want to do business with. So to know that up front, if I'm looking at my pipeline and saying, gee, I don't have enough pipeline, what are the companies that meet my target market, that look like the companies I want to do business with? And how do I now go have the conversation I just referenced with them? That is a productive use of your time versus just randomly tweeting and liking and posting and whatever else and hoping that the right companies see that and come back to you.
So how do I say this? I'm just kind of curious out of your experience. Um, do you find, actually, I saw in an article, I hope I still have it here. Where was that? Was it a Forbes? Was it Forbes? What the heck was I looking at? I was looking at an article here that said something like 68%. Here it is. It might have been here. 68% of business-to-business marketers haven't identified what their sales and marketing funnels are. Do you find that a lot? I've actually found that a lot of my clients who are business-to-business folks actually do not run a pipeline.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Well, I'm always surprised when I find sales organizations that don't have one, because I don't know how you do sales without it. I'm not surprised when I see that marketers don't have one, because I think marketers don't often think in that way. And a lot of marketing organizations and marketers have a lead goal that they've either been given or that they created arbitrarily at the beginning of the year, and they go and achieve that lead goal, but they have no idea whatever happens with it, right? I mean, if your goal as a marketer is to generate leads, those leads don't necessarily have anything to do with the pipeline. So you may be generating those just, in the vacuum of understanding how they get converted and how they get monetized by the business. But we encourage our clients. I mean, it's not that hard just to build one spreadsheet, one funnel amongst you. So if I need to close $100,000 in deals, so I need $400,000 in pipeline, how many leads do I need to give to my salespeople to convert into those $400,000 in pipeline?
Oh my gosh, it's probably like 10 times that, maybe more.
It's 20 times that. So we find that the typical conversion rate of qualified leads into opportunities in any given period of time is 5%. So think about how scary this math gets, right? And I'm not making this up. This is like 9 years of having done this a million times for clients. 5% conversion of leads to opportunities and 25% conversion of opportunities to close deals. What is that, like 1.25%?
Oh yeah.
Of your leads are going to close. Like, that's the math, right? And so if you have a great conversation with someone on LinkedIn today, okay, great. You need to go have 99 more to close a deal, right? And so what are you going to do to scale that? What are you going to do to feed that? Now, you mentioned earlier how many people are concerned about their pipeline. If you do that math, I hope a lot more people are concerned about their pipeline than were at the beginning of this conversation. But better to have that concern, better to have that sense of urgency and light that fire under you today, October 2nd, than on December 15th when you got to close a bunch of business before the end of the year.
I want to bring something up here from the chat stream. Louis Gudema says, are we talking about enterprise or SMB? Few SMBs have processes, but it's very different in enterprise. And I pretty much agree with that.
Yeah, so I guess a couple ways to answer that question. One is, are you selling to enterprise or SMB, or are you an SMB or an enterprise, right? Whether you yourself are a small business or an enterprise, I think you have to have some level of discipline around how you manage your pipeline. I mean, like I said, we're 12 people. We're not a very big company, but it's maybe even more important for me to manage our pipeline to make sure there's consistency of sales and revenue so people can continue to get paid. At an enterprise level, sometimes companies get so big and get so much gravity behind them that they can get complacent or lazy about pipeline, but deals still happen. I think that's a scary place to be, and I think that's a slippery slope. But I think if you're selling to enterprise or SMB, it still matters. Now, the difference is, if you're selling to SMB, you probably have to do a lot more sales to hit your number, a lot more individual sales. So the economics of your sales are different, but the pipeline still applies. Like, if you're selling to enterprise, maybe $100,000 in sales is one client. It's one deal. If you're selling to SMB, maybe that's 1,000 deals at $100 each, right? I mean, it could be, you never know.
And the other thing that comes into place, at least it's been my experience when I'm selling to small businesses, when I'm working with small business owners, the great thing about that is that it's a very, very quick decision-making process. They could decide on a whim. They could decide in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a week. Whereas when I'm in conversations inside of an enterprise deal, we are talking bureaucracies and contracts and legal, and a sales could go on for like 9 months.
Oh yeah, I mean, once you get to procurement, procurement is the sales prevention department. I mean, that could be months in and of itself. I want to comment on something that Strategy Stu just said here up on the Twitter stream. Said, I don't think it's a pipeline. It's more like sticky notes on a board. I don't care how it manifests itself. If you've got sticky notes on a board that represent your deals, and if that organizes you to know which of them are pending and which of them need more work, That sounds like a pipeline to me. I mean, like just because you're using a CRM system, just because you're using a Salesforce or a Sugar or a Dynamics or a HubSpot, just because you have one of those doesn't mean you have a pipeline. We had a client a couple of years ago. It was a team of Morgan Stanley financial sort of wealth managers, and they were not the most tech savvy people in the world. And so, but they ended up building their pipeline in a spreadsheet. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why I wouldn't want to use a spreadsheet for my pipeline, but they were better at managing their pipeline with a spreadsheet than most of our clients are doing it in the CRM system. So strategy stew, your sticky notes, if you know the mathematics of your pipeline, if you know how those stickies tell you where to focus every day, every week to get those deals done, that's fantastic. Do not shoehorn yourself into a tool or a process that you're not going to follow. It's more important to use a process and a system, whether it's sticky notes or CRM systems or spreadsheets, that it makes sense to you and that you will follow so that you can hit your number.
Hey, do you see Dr. Dory's tweet? It's got a GIF on it with some very shaky people.
No.
If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see Dr. Dory Cooper, and she says, I think that I'm too small because other than plan my calendar and track engagement, I may be missing the boat. I may be missing the bus. And she's got these like scary guys shaking. What do you have to say to her?
Well, I would say, Dory, that at the risk of sounding like Bill Clinton, I feel your pain. I feel it. I mean, I'm a small business. I don't have a sales team. Like, I am the sales team for our company. And so, and we're a small company. So, I got to make sure the bills are paid. I got to, make sure payroll is processed. I got a bunch of operational roles, let alone working with clients and managing our pipeline. So there's a lot that's got to be done in there. It would be really easy for me just to follow up on my email and just to follow my calendar and just respond to random inbound requests. But I can tell you through experience that if I simply respond to what comes in front of me, that is a far less efficient way of building my pipeline. It's a far less efficient way of making sure I'm building the right pipeline. And I have to be proactive at going out and building relationships for the companies that I want to do business with. So I'm not going to pretend or promise that this stuff is easy. I'm not going to say that it's going to take less time. If you're a small business trying to do all these things, that is a lot of work. But I fundamentally believe no matter what business you're in, like managing that sales function, managing your pipeline, having enough of the right conversations so that some of them turn into new business. If you don't do that on a consistent basis, you don't have a business moving forward.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome and so helpful, I know. Let's see. Okay, back to the conversation at hand here. I thought that was just an absolutely great thing. And then in that talking, I lost my train of thought.
Uh-oh.
Which is like so helpful that I'm losing my train. What do you think? Oh, I know what it was, because I wanted to talk about the tools, right? Because you said that just because you have a tool, it's not about whether it's a sticky note or it's a tool or whatever. What would you tell Dory or anybody else who maybe, like you mentioned spreadsheets and a couple other folks mentioned that they've used spreadsheets before. What's a great way to get started if you have nothing?
If you have nothing, use a format you're comfortable with, whether it's a spreadsheet or it could be sticky notes or just a pad and paper, and get everything in one place. Literally, and I think, if you're not managing a pipeline today, it's likely that the potential deals you have are in multiple locations. Some of them might be in your inbox. You've been chatting back and forth with someone. Some of them might be in a note, like you've just put a note on a pad of paper. And so I'll follow up on that later. You may have a sticky note on the side of your monitor. Find a format you're comfortable with that you trust that gets all of that into one place. It doesn't have to be a CRM system. You may never buy a CRM system if you're a small business. You may do it all in spreadsheets. You may all do it on sticky notes. Like I've seen some people, really small businesses, you go in and they have a whiteboard or they have a cork board and their pipeline is there. That's fine. If that's your tool to keep you focused and to keep it in front of you to get the job done, then great. I mean, there was someone that just wrote in and said, a lot of small business owners don't have time. They're wearing too many hats and they're too busy selling. That is a dangerous thing. And it sounds funny for me to say that if you're too busy selling, it's dangerous to not have a pipeline. You may be selling to the wrong people. You may be selling deals that are unprofitable. You may be selling deals that don't scale. If you're trying to get recurring business and you're selling too many projects, how does that help you hit your number next month, next quarter? If you're simply responding to requests that come inbound, inbound's great, except for you don't have control over quantity and quality. So if the wrong prospects come in and take up your time, if you're busy selling to people that are not long-term clients, how do you spend more of that time going after the right long-term clients? You know, it may be a little harder and you may have to get out of your comfort zone. Like, I am an introvert. I do not like cold calling. I don't like having conversations with people who don't on the other side want to have that conversation. But my anecdote to that is, what can I bring that's valuable? What can I do if I'm reaching out to someone that wasn't waiting to hear from me? How do I have a conversation that is going to immediately bring them value? Something where if they hang up the phone after the conversation, they say, wow, that's great. I would have paid for that insight. I would have paid for that time with the value I just got from that. So how do you have that kind of a conversation? And how do you use that level of confidence in that strategy to now go and sell, but sell by bringing value, sell by helping someone challenge a status quo on their own side? You know, busy selling is good, but you got to be busy selling to the right prospects that are best matched for your business.
So it just dawned on me that we did not answer a very, 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 very important question. We've been talking about sticky notes and tools and blah, blah. Could you, Matt, lay out a good, you know, what's in the sales pipeline? What are those categories, right? Like, you know, what comes in, prospects, blah, blah, blah. What have you found to be a really effective categorization of pipeline? You know what I'm talking about. What do you call those? Funnels.
There's a couple ways to think of, there's a couple ways to think about this. And the first one, I'll just sort of categorize levels of interest. You may have a list, right? Just because you have a list doesn't mean you're talking to them, but a list of the right prospects is one thing. Inquiries is sort of a second step. Is there some level of engagement or inquiry from that prospect to you? Lead would be number 3, right? So you've got list, inquiry, lead. Lead is someone that's the right person at the right company that is inquiring with you, that you have an ongoing conversation with. If you move someone from being the right person at the right company to having a level of qualification, right? If they're qualified for some version of BANT, budget, authority, need, timeline, that you may say is a qualified opportunity, and then you can work through the sales stages till you get closed deal. I think a lot of people confuse list with leads. I think a lot of people confuse inquiries from qualified leads. And a lot of people confuse leads from opportunities. Just because you're talking to someone that's the right person at the right company doesn't mean they're going to buy. A chatty prospect is not a qualified prospect, right? It's got to be someone that has a need, that has money, that has a timeline, that is somehow an authority to make a decision. Like, those things have to be in place.
So we've got list, inquiry, qualified leads, opportunities, whoops, right?
And then closed deals.
And then customers. Oh my God, can I count? I cannot count.
It's hard to do. I can't type and talk at the same time. The other way to think about this are what we would call sort of stages of the buying journey.
That's the one. That was what I was looking at.
Yeah. So the very beginning of that is something that we just call attention, right? Before you can have a conversation, a qualifying conversation with the prospect, you have to get their attention. We're all super busy. We have short attention spans. What can you offer someone that gets them to stop what they're doing and pay attention to you? Once you have their attention, your job is to loosen the status quo. What they are doing today is not good enough. What they're doing today is not likely going to achieve the results that they want. So what can you do to challenge or loosen the status quo so that they all of a sudden realize they have a need that they didn't know? If you're trying to quantify the cost of a problem that they did or didn't know that they have. So we go from attention, 1, to loosening of the status quo, 2, to 3, got my fingers up on the screen here, 3, which is a commitment to change. And those last 2 stages come right out of the Serious Decisions buying journey model they published a couple of years ago. Once you've got someone committed to change, I think that is the hardest part of the sales process and the most important part of the sales process. Because if you have someone that's simply looking at your software or simply has given you a little bit of their time, if they're not committed to a change on their own behalf, then they are not committed to the sales process. They're not committed to giving up money in exchange for solving that problem, for enabling that change, for achieving that outcome that the change represents, or the change enables, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and beyond that, you get into sort of, discovering solutions, evaluating solutions, justifying the decision. Like, that all then happens. But I think the most important part of the sales process that most people ignore are, how do I have someone's attention? Do I have someone's attention? Can I loosen the status quo of something they're thinking about that they're not thinking about correctly? And then can I get them to commit to change? Commit to change on their own behalf, commit to change to achieve an outcome that they have now prioritized as an urgent need. Those are the stages of the buying journey I think are super, super important. And if you apply those stages to your personas, who are the people that you're selling to? Now you've got essentially a content map, right? Take those personas. Who are the people that you're selling to? What's the message they are going to want to hear at each of those buying journey stages? Attention, loosen, status quo, commit to change. In each of those cells becomes a set of messages and a set of bullet points that enumerate what you should be saying in the process.
Oh my God, I'll tell you what. I was listening to you as you were going through these, and one of the things I really love, and this is like a really good thing about the pipeline, is that you could call it whatever you want. One of my favorite things to do is actually to name these things something that helps me decide on what the next action is that I have to take, right? Because that was like my secret sauce the last time. What had not occurred to me, even though like I kind of knew it, but today hearing you say it has like hit me square between the eyes, is that these stages of the pipeline are actually a content map. Because one of the rules is, Matt, isn't it, that I talk about you should be writing for the people in different stages of the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, we often will develop, for our clients, we'll develop this as a content map to make the content more efficient. I mean, I think a lot of people have an editorial calendar based on their personas. That's a lot of great insights. But if most of those are just attention grabbers, like, oh, I've got more of their attention, I've got more of their clicks, they're coming back to the blog more often, that's all great. But how do you convert attention into that loosening of the status quo or challenging the status quo? How well do you understand what the prospect's interests are, what their objectives are, what's keeping them from their objectives, and how do you start to introduce insights that challenge the path that they're on, that challenge the goals that they have, that challenge the quality, the likelihood of them hitting their goals? I mean, so for instance, if this conversation was a sales call, I might have some people that came on saying, oh, you know what? Like, I got lots of conversations. I'm super busy talking to prospects. Part of my loosening the status quo with that person, if they were a prospect, might be, interesting, you're having a lot of prospect calls. What % of those calls are people that you want to do business with? People you would have proactively chosen to do business with? And most of the time when you're working on inbound and you're doing inbound inquiries, the majority of those calls, the majority of those conversations are people that, I'll do business with them, but it's not my proactive target. They're not my ideal target prospects. So to be able to sit there and say, wow, I thought I was really busy doing sales, but it sounds like I might not be focused on the right sales. That's an insight. That is a loosening of the status quo that is not going to get them to sort of hand off over their money to Heinz Marketing right now, right? But at least says, that's really interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. How would I fix that? What are the things I should be doing to try to address that and make that better? Like, that's the next part of the conversation. That still is not a commitment to change, but is still part of the discovery and the challenging and the loosening of the status quo that gets someone to understand what they need to do and why.
So you just answered that question, but while you were answering that question, I was looking at the Twitter feed, and it's Suzanne wants to know, she loved this loosening the status. Yeah. It's unfamiliar to her. She goes, I probably know what it means. I've just never heard of it. So I know that you just talked about it, but maybe you can give us another example.
Yep. So it's not just loosening, it's loosening the status quo, right? So we all, we do things sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes subliminally that we think is the right path, right? We think is going to help us achieve the results that we want. And then all of a sudden, sometimes you learn something that isn't really congruent with that, right? That challenges that need. So let's say the status quo is that you live in an apartment in downtown Seattle and you commute to Bellevue every day, and you're back and forth Bellevue every day. So that's your status quo, and it's fine. Like, I live in an apartment and I got a job in Bellevue, which is across the lake, and everything's good. And then traffic starts getting worse, and then they start increasing your rent, and then all of a sudden they put tolls on the bridge. You're like, well, this just got time consuming and more expensive. Like, shouldn't I move to Bellevue? Shouldn't I move somewhere closer? So in that case, the loosening of the status quo had to do with new insights, new input that made it more challenging to stay on your current path. I can't continue to live in Seattle if I'm going to spend this much time in the car and spend this much time on tolls and this much money on an apartment that's expensive. What could I do different? I'm now committed. At some point, I'm going to be like, you know what? Something has to change. I'm committed to a change to this environment. I have not yet committed to either change my job and go work in Seattle, or maybe I should move, or maybe I should just start taking the bus, right? Maybe if I took the bus, my transportation costs would go down and I could actually read a book as opposed to sitting in stop and go traffic. So I haven't yet chosen the results, but I've committed to doing something different. And that loosening of the status quo in those situations is what leads that I have to do something.
Got it.
And that's what you, yeah.
Got it. That's a really, really fantastic example. So I remember the question because I wrote it down, Matt, but I forgot that I wrote it down.
Okay.
Yeah. The question I had for you is, we talked about sales funnels and marketing funnels. And you said, lots of folks will use a sales funnel or a pipeline. Marketers, not so much, or marketers aren't as committed. We had this whole conversation. I'd like to have another conversation about the distinctions between a sales pipeline and a marketing pipeline. How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, they should be the same. In an ideal world, it's not like marketing has one prospect and sales has another. It's the same prospect at different stages of the journey. So ideally, there's leads that convert into opportunities convert into deals. And generally, marketing owns the top of that pipeline and sales owns the bottom of that pipeline. The difference is sales traditionally thinks in a pipeline mentality. Even if they don't have that 25 to 33% conversion rate in mind, sales knows that I have to go find a bunch of people that might buy to get to those that do. And so that, even if you don't have some discipline of metrics around it, that's your pipeline, right? Marketing often just has a simple goal: generate 100 leads this month, right? Generate 1,000 leads next month. Like whatever the number is, it's not necessarily a pipeline as much as it is just a goal to hit a certain number that goes to sales, and then who knows what happens. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I talk to in mature marketing organizations that have no idea what the lead conversion rates are, that have no idea how many leads sales actually needs. So marketing has this goal of, I have to get 100 leads. I have to get 150 people to come to my trade show, right? And some of those goals are created arbitrarily. And maybe that's 50% of what the sales team needs. Maybe it's 300% of what the sales team needs. Maybe it's 5% of what the sales team needs. So at the end of the day, when marketing hits its lead goal and they're down at the bar, celebrating because they hit their end of month retweet goal or whatever, and sales is still grinding it out because they had to go supplement, all the other business they needed that marketing didn't generate. I mean, there's a big disconnect there when that happens. And that's not true everywhere. Increasingly, we are seeing more and more marketers that understand their contribution to the sales pipeline. I see this year more than ever, I've seen marketers that don't have a lead goal. They have a marketing sourced pipeline goal. So their job is not to generate a bunch of leads. Their job is, okay, I have to generate 40% of our net new pipeline in Q4. Now we're talking, right? Because now it's not just someone that's willing to fill out a form, but it's someone that actually fits criteria that we care about. So all those random inbound leads, if you're selling, an enterprise IT solution, I don't care that the dentist in South Carolina likes your white paper. Like, they're not going to buy. That will never become a qualified opportunity. It will never become part of your marketing source pipeline. So it starts to not only get sales and marketing on the same page, but it also it modifies the marketing behavior. Again, here's another example of losing the status quo, right? If marketing has always just been generating leads, if marketing's just had a lead goal, and all of a sudden the CFO comes down and says, most of those leads are crap, right? That like the sales team can't use most of those leads. You now have to be measured based on pipeline contribution. Well, that's changing the status quo, right?
No kidding. It's reminding me of that Glenn Ross scene. The leads are no good. The leads are no good. Right?
And a lot, look, sometimes the leads are fine and sales just has the wrong approach. Like, I mean, if you get a white paper lead from someone that downloaded a white paper off your website, that is not inherently someone that's ready to buy. But what about that white paper made them inquire? Like, what about that topic? Why did someone intentionally put their name on your spam list in order to get access to a PDF? Like, what's going on there? And so that that conversation might be the beginning of the sales conversation. That might be the I have your attention, let's challenge your status quo part of the conversation that would need to come next.
Let's talk about nurturing the pipeline, because I think that's the place also where the sales and marketing come together, right?
Yeah.
Because if you are, let's say from the marketing side of the coin, if you're responsible for generating 40% of the leads, as you said, no, what did you say? 40% of the pipeline?
Yeah.
You used the phrase. If that's your responsibility, then it behooves you to be very, very efficient about that. And you've got to make sure that you're nurturing that pipeline so that what blips over from the top of the funnel into the sales group is something solid.
Yeah. I think, you know, it forces you to rethink what you're doing. I think, you know, a lot of marketers focus on generating just more, right? More leads, more clicks, more likes. More is not necessarily better. You know, when I've seen some marketing organizations, when they get focused more on pipeline as a goal versus leads as the goal, they end up doing less. You know, they focus more on the right prospects to get them into the fold. You know, more is no longer better. And now if you're focused on getting more of the right pipeline, and it may change your behavior, you may have a digital marketing manager who has always focused on getting the lowest possible cost per lead. That may be counterproductive to actually filling your pipeline, right? Maybe I'm willing to spend 4x the amount on leads to get the right leads that my sales team can actually convert into long-term good business. You know,
exactly.
So I think it's, you know, changing that goal oftentimes will change the behavior and the culture that exists in the marketing organization. And that last piece I think is critical. Is that when marketing has a culture of just getting more and more and more, when you think more is better, it drives a certain level of behavior that can be counterproductive to sales. You know, when you're able to change the culture within marketing to focus on revenue responsibility, to focus on pipeline contribution, you know, what we describe it as, you know, a sort of predictable pipeline. It's not just generating pipeline, but it's creating systems that can predictably generate qualified pipeline next month, next quarter. I mean, there's many companies and many individuals and many small businesses that get complacent on pipelines. Like, oh, we just had a great Q3. Like we had all these great calls, and you know, Microsoft called me this big project. We had a great Q3, so we're doing good. That's fantastic. What level of confidence do you have that you can repeat that in Q4? If I asked you today to repeat that effort and to get those sales all again for Q1 of 2018, how would you do it? Would it be you have to sit and wait for Microsoft to call again, right? I mean, would you have to have those random inbounds that happen to make your number and that's how you did it? Or can you sit here and tell me that you know how you are going to proactively go and create predictably, scalably that pipeline again? Like that's where you have to get to. Now that is hard and that takes a long time to get to and to build those systems. But that is where most businesses need to get to have not only the marketing contribution and impact of pipeline, but to have a predictable, repeatable, scalable business, period.
That's such a good point, right? And so I don't know if we've sort of been talking around this, but I think what I'm aiming for in this question are some very, very specific tips from you, Mr. Content Guru Guy. Filling the pipeline, what are some great creative ways to fill the pipeline? To your point, you know, if you've gotten something that works, like maybe it's a great quiz or whatever, it might have worked the first time and then you do it again and that might not work again. What are some different things you could experiment with to fill that pipeline?
A couple of things people don't really think always about. You know, one is, you know, find complementary service providers, find complementary businesses that also have access to the people you care about where you don't compete with them, and find a way to go to market together, do a webinar together, do an offer together, and market to each other's lists. It becomes a really quick and easy way to get access to their customers in a way where they may have access to yours as well. But, you know, net new names is a great way of getting new interest in your business. So that's one. You know, I think if you're able to define something that is quite valuable to get someone's attention, you know, I mean, content can be a great part of this. If you know your prospects are thinking about planning for 2018 right now, you know, what's your advice that you would give someone to work on that planning? What are 10 things people should be incorporating into their 2018 strategic planning efforts? Like write a blog post and send people a link to that blog post that you think are your target market, right? I mean, you're going to get a small percent of people that might actually see it and read it, but you do those things over time, you get a reputation for delivering good content. I think oftentimes when I get that question of, what are the tactics we do? I think when people are listening, they expect to hear some kind of silver bullet, right? They want some big new insight or some big growth hack, whatever, that's going to like totally transform it. You know what? There is no silver bullet. There's daily consistent execution of just good work, of good value. I have yet to write the blog post to end all blog post that gets every prospect to convert on the spot. I don't think that's ever going to happen, right? But there's a body of work that over time people recognize there's good value here. When I go to Matt's blog, I see good value. When I go to his Twitter stream, I see that he's curating interesting stuff from around the web that's valuable to sales and marketing professionals. Now, it's my job then to convert that interest, to identify and convert that interest into those loosening the status quo conversations. But it starts with attention. So I guess, the other way I'd answer your question is, what are the tactical things you could be doing to get and earn and keep your prospect's attention right now?
That is a great question. Okay, so let's shift the conversation over. I know that we talked a little bit about you can use sticky notes, you could use, a spreadsheet or whatever, but let's get down and dirty. What are some of your favorite tools for managing a pipeline? And let's say, maybe at different price points, or let's just talk tools. Hashtag tools.
Yeah. Honestly, spreadsheets is a place to start. I think whether you use spreadsheet or Evernote, or just, Post-it notes on the wall. Start with somewhere you can just get them all together. I'm still a big fan of Salesforce.com.
Yeah.
I use it every day. I realize it has, it's got a lot of bells and whistles. It's complicated for a lot of people. You know what else is complicated? Microsoft Word. Have you noticed ever like the number of buttons and features in Microsoft Word? I use like 2% of them, right? But it's indispensable for me. Salesforce is the same way. If there's a lot of buttons you don't use, don't worry about those buttons. Like I use like 1% of Salesforce and it's indispensable for me. There are tools if you really don't want to spend the money and if you don't want to have the buttons up there. There are a lot of great tools. Nimble, someone mentioned, is a great tool. I think it's a great pipeline tool. It's very social, very conversational. There's a company here in Seattle called Pipeline Deals. It is a great CRM system for small business. They do a lot of work with what I would call nuts and bolts industry folks. Lots of, think about contractors and roofers and plumbers. And it's just very simple, very easy to use system. If you want something that incorporates both a CRM system and marketing tools, both HubSpot and Infusionsoft do a nice job at incorporating those two systems together, especially for smaller businesses that don't want a lot of complexity. So those are a handful of tools you can look at. There is no one size fits all. It has to match your work habits. It has to be something you're going to commit to using and leaning into on a regular basis. So find something that works for you and that you're going to stick with.
That's the most important point I think that you've brought up. And that is whatever tool you use, make it something that you visit all the time. And I totally get it. I have a client that we've used Salesforce with them for just so many years that we absolutely do not want to switch.
Right.
Just because, it's the devil, and we're using it and it's working and it's fine.
Well, and 9 times out of 10, when people want to switch platforms, it's actually not the platform's fault. It's your fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see this in marketing automation all the time. I see people say like, well, this platform didn't work, so we're going to this one. It's like, well, how were you using this one? Well, they weren't, right? So if you move to something bigger, more complex, or something more simple, if you're not using it correctly, then nothing is going to work, right? So you have to really look in the mirror and consider your habits and your usage patterns first and foremost.
I think that's such a great point. One of my favorite pipeline tools is Trello. Because I spend, and now I've even heard that Google has something that's connected to your email. So you can create your email into a pipeline.
Oh, well, so I have so I use Salesforce. Salesforce gives every individual user an email address. It's an email to Salesforce email address. I blind copy Salesforce all the time, and it adds those emails into the activity stream for those prospects. And, that gets added into the pipeline as well. I use Outlook for my email, and I have a sidebar that looks whatever email I'm looking at. It shows me if that person's in Salesforce. It shows me what activity and opportunities are associated with it. So getting that into my workflow, so I don't have to go to Salesforce.com every time. I can do most of it right from wherever else I am, whether it's my email or whatnot. Super, super helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the important thing. I'm going to share something with folks that I'm not too embarrassed to share about because my business is a little bit different than a lot of folks. But I had a lot of different pipeline tools and I wasn't using them effectively. And I'm going to, have my own little, what is it called? Confession here. And that was that I did not have a clear offer of what I was selling to people. And it occurs to me with a lot of businesses that there's not, just because you are sell pizzas, you can sell pizzas or you could sell tax returns, doing tax returns or whatever it is that your small business does. But either way, it's really important to be clear what you're selling. Back to your point, people have conversations, but those conversations don't lead to anything.
Right.
And I think it took me, I'm going to tell you, like 3 or 4 years, when it dawned on me that I had lots of conversations and I didn't have goals around any particular product offer or service.
Yeah.
And I said, a lot of that is the function of my business, a little nebulous, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of folks can kind of what have you seen in terms of that? Like folks not being clear, like, okay, if you're selling widgets, you're selling widgets. Sometimes that's real obvious. But if you're not selling particular widgets and you've got flexibility or maybe a lot of customization, have you found that impacts people's usage of a pipeline?
I guess so. I guess you got to know why you're doing it, and you have to have motivation for why you're doing it, right? And I think this is one of the challenges we have with convincing salespeople to use CRM. If they think it's just a management tool and an oversight tool, why are they motivated to use it?
Correct.
If they think it's actually going to help them save time and be more organized and focus on the right deals, then they're more motivated to use it, right? So, it's the same goes with any kind of sales process. This is why the understanding of that loosening the status quo and a commitment to change is so important. I'm not going to do what you tell me to do unless I see what's in it for me, unless I see what the outcome is and believe in the outcome and believe that what you're offering can help me achieve that outcome. That motivation is really, really important. We do this all the time when we, do productivity best practices for salespeople, whether it's social selling or CRM usage or whatnot. It's like, I'm not going to teach you all these things you can do just to make you busier, to give you more tabs open in your browser. Like the whole idea here is you're going to be able to sell more efficiently. You're going to be able to close more deals. You're going to be able to make more money in less time in a far more scalable way than you ever have before by following these processes. So if you can get someone bought off on that outcome, it doesn't matter what the solution is. It could be hardware, software, pixie dust, magic dragons, doesn't matter as long as it delivers that outcome.
Well, I think you've just answered question number 10, which was how to enroll sales and management and growing your pipeline. Is there anything else to add to that?
Well, I think, adding more work is not the way to do it. You've got to sort of point out like, hey, we are not very effective today. Point out the inefficiency of what you're doing today. Point out that your planning spreadsheet expects a 60% conversion rate, and the reality is you're doing 25% conversion rate. And so you actually need to adjust your pipeline next year. Now, how are you going to do that? Maybe this justifies actually going and doing more marketing, right? Or doing more campaigns to actually fill the pipeline with more leads. So I think that making a case based on current pain, whether people understand what that problem and pain is, or based on quantifying what the outcome needs to be, super important.
Well, Matt, that brings us to the very end of the chat. Is there anything, I know you have a pipeline program coming up, and I know you've given everyone so much great information. Talk about the program and where people can get more information.
Yeah, so we next week we are doing a 2-day workshop on pipeline development, how to build a repeatable, scalable revenue marketing engine. So everything we're talking about today, we're going to go into a ton of detail. We've got templates, we've got tools, we've got examples. Myself and Robert Pease, who runs our predictable pipeline practice, say that 5 times fast. We're going to be doing that next week. So I'll throw a link to that into the tweet stream, and would love to see anybody there. It'd be great.
Oh, I am so looking forward to getting more information about that. And there you have it, everyone. Another lovely plugged in session to Bizapalooza Chat, where we talk to Matt Hines from Hines Marketing about filling your pipeline. It's October, people. Get on filling that pipeline. Thanks so much for being here. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.